So at least this part of it you'll be able to see. But what I should have done was to have placed the examples that I showed you of the first 5 compositional elements in the resources folder, so that you could have gone back and looked at the examples that you looked at. So they're all in there now. Not only the ones we did before, but the ones we're going to look at now, as well as a few little PDF files that talk about different aspects of composition. If you want to take a look at those, it might help you out. But if you get stuck about, what is exactly this compositional element, you want to see examples of it, you can either look there or watch the recording of this part of the class. All right, so let me get into that. All right. And again, when I'm in full screen mode, my cursor is gone, so I need to make sure that, nope, let me move this. As much as I like this platform, it has definitely got some drawbacks. All right, now let's work. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is the use of diagonals. So we've mentioned a couple of times that triangles and diagonals are way more powerful in an image than horizontals and verticals. So here's an image that's kind of split in half right along the middle of the image with a horizontal line. And just by cropping the image, and actually it's probably the same image, they're showing you how much more dynamic it is with that diagonal that runs through the image. Let me go back to the original. That one is just sort of, it's okay, but it's kind of blah. That one, that diagonal separates those two areas of the image that are so vastly different in texture and everything else, and just makes it a much more powerful image, I think, than what the one straight across was. So anytime you have a line in your, not anytime, but a lot of times that you have lines or a line in your image, and that, we saw some this week with flower stems and things like that. It may generally be stronger and more advisable to try that on a slight diagonal than straight up and down or straight across. Just something to keep in mind. One of the other elements is framing, and this was one that's kind of fun to work with. It's an image within an image. There are a lot of different examples of this. This is simply looking out a window. That's probably the simplest example that you can come up with for framing, that you have it's almost like a picture hanging on the wall, but it's actually looking through the window. So there's a lot of examples of that. You can use a foreground element to frame your background element. This is probably one of the more common examples of it. And throwing that foreground element out of focus is even a stronger way to set that off. The black and white, for an image like this probably even enhances it a little bit more. Same kind of a thing. The rock outcropping in the foreground is in silhouette or near silhouette, and it kind of frames that image in the background. And then kind of a more subtle look at it. This is the balcony at the cathedral, and it's just sort of framed with the two columns in the foreground, one of which is very dark, but you can actually still kind of make out what it is. And then the couple is in the center area. Also notice the slimline crop on this. It's not the full 4:6 aspect or 2:3 aspect ratio. It's cropped in a little bit tighter, just to give a little more impact to the center of the image. Again, a kind of a subtle one. This artisan is framed by the foreground, the lighting area that's above him, the table that's below him, that are all very dark, and they kind of create this dark frame around him. And it sort of kind of keeps your eye in that little area right inside there. Another example of it, this is a covered bridge, and our subject is actually in the foreground, and the background is framed by this window. But so this is just a little bit of a different look at it. Your subject does not have to be whatever is through that window. Your subject can be in the foreground and be framed by the background. So perspective and viewpoint, again, are very similar, just like leading lines and convergence were. Perspective, in this case, is looking from a low angle, low vantage point and looking up. And what it does is it really eliminates a lot of clutter. There's an image, one of my images that I think is, yeah, it's this one. So had gone down to photograph at the waterfront and recognized when we got there that it was the Sternwheeler Festival. So the place was packed. There were all these boats and people and vendors and everything else. So there's a little bit of a tree, not a tree stump, but I think what used to be a telephone pole stump. I had him jump up on the stump, got down at a low angle. We got really lucky that the sky was as dramatic as it was, and it actually kind of mirrors the colors in his outfit. There's still a few distractions in the bottom of this that were impossible to get out with just the viewpoint. They could have been taken out easily in Photoshop. But just by getting down to a little bit of a lower angle, we eliminated a whole bunch of problems. Same kind of an idea. So I think I mentioned last week or week before that when I was shooting a lot of weddings, I would think to myself the night before, what are the most boring pictures I have to take tomorrow, and what can I do to improve them a little bit? Well, there's these group shots, you got to do them. You got to do the groomsmen. You got to do the bridesmaids. You got to do the bride with the groomsmen. You got to do the groom with the bride. I mean, it's just all this stuff, this whole list that you go through, a mental checklist to make sure you've got. And rather than do the same old thing, so in this case, I actually changed the viewpoint, shot from that balcony, had the groomsmen down below, and you can see that there's a little bit of a lighting change. There's a flash positioned at the front of that aisle, which is creating some highlights and some rim lighting on them because they're kind of dark against a dark background. So we needed something to make them pop a little bit more. Oh, and also posing plays a big part of that. Notice that no two of them are posed the same way. Again, we're trying to vary the height. We're trying to vary, spread them out so that there's a little bit of a distance between the two of them. So we have separation on all of them, and then having them all posed just slightly differently, rather than just standing there, creates a little bit of drama as well. So for viewpoint, so this was shot in a hotel room prior to the wedding, and I happened to notice something off to the side, which, this shot was okay. But for me, I really like that one better. That's the videographer who's getting a close-up shot of the bride. So this kind of creates balance between her and that screen. Notice that the screen is what's been focused on. So she's been allowed to go out of focus. So they're actually both, I think we used both of them in the album because they kind of played off each other. But you just always want to be aware that there might be something in the foreground that kind of helps you with your viewpoint as well. Simplicity can be a really powerful one. So this is also rule of thirds, because the only subject in here is that little bird and its shadow right at that impact point. But the simplicity is the overpowering part. You can't not see that bird because of how simple the rest of the entire image is. You can see detail, you can tell that it's water, you see the ripples, but there's not enough detail to overpower that tiny little subject. This is another one which could also qualify as rule of thirds, but the simplicity of it and contrast, I mean, all of these things come into play that keep your eye on that subject. And as vast and as detailed as that background is, we don't spend any time, our brain doesn't spend any time there. It always goes to the subject for those reasons. Your eye will always go to the area of greatest contrast. It'll always go to one of those impact points. And if everything else in the image is rather nondescript, it's going to go to the only detailed area. Same kind of thing. So notice the thing about this image that is really cool and what really, really makes it work. Can anybody pick it out? There's one thing that I've been kind of harping on a little bit over the last couple of weeks about shooting images, certain images with lines in them. Does anybody see anything about the lines in this image?
It's the grid.
It's not only a grid. Do you notice anything else about it? Like the perfection of it. Do you see how those lines are perfectly vertical and perfectly horizontal? So you could make a case for saying, wow, if you tilted the camera, you could make triangles and diamonds out of those. Yes, you could. And that could be effective as well. But if you're going to shoot with horizontal and vertical lines, this is really makes a lot of impact to make sure they're absolutely perfect. Now, was it perfect when he shot it? Probably not. Probably this was done in cropping, in post-production, because to get that perfectly, you'd have to be directly overhead in the center of that area. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. It could be a catwalk or something like that. But those lines are perfectly vertical, perfectly horizontal all the way through. Symmetry is another one. Now, symmetry doesn't have to be exactly perfectly symmetrical. Notice the trash can in the lower right-hand corner, which is not symmetrical with anything on the left-hand side, but everything else is. Even the way it's cropped with with all four sides, everything is vertical or horizontal. Again, not off by a little bit. You have the same amount of woodwork on the left that you do on the right. Roughly the same amount of woodwork on the top as you have stonework on the bottom. So even though we have some differences, the flower in the window baskets are different from left and right, this still qualifies as a symmetrical image because of the way it's handled. So this is my version of it. This is, I used to do a lot of real estate photography, and so this was, you know, going into the house, noticing how they had decorated it outside and how symmetrical it was, made for a pretty interesting image. So again, symmetry, leading lines, convergence, there's all sorts of things here that you can look at. The more compositional elements you put in a shot, the stronger it's going to be. Also, the lighting plays a little bit of a part here. If you can imagine this being lit like just with, you know, a lot of ambient overall, which would have been just kind of even lighting, I don't think there's as much drama as there is the way this is lit, you know, those handrails being lit from underneath and so forth. It's kind of cool. And the design of the backgrounds really lends itself pretty interesting too. There's an escalator. Anybody ever been to the subway stations in Atlanta? So there's an escalator that leads from Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta down to the subway platform that is the longest, steepest escalator I think I've ever seen. In fact, I watch a lot of people on that are actually turn around and face backwards because it's so steep that it causes vertigo. Like people are afraid they're going to fall. It's really kind of strange. Escalators they can be fun subjects to play with. Another symmetrical image. Couple of other things that really make this work. Very, very narrow, very small aperture, which is what's creating those star-shaped bursts on the lighting. Also, very long shutter speed, which is causing the water in the foreground to really blur out. The current's making that blur, that reflection. But the background, the image itself, very, very symmetrical. Also, color harmony, a lot of stuff at play here that makes this image really work. So I've said about horizon lines not being directly in the center of an image. In this case, it works because of the symmetry of this image. The symmetry here isn't left and right so much as it is top and bottom. So having that line go right down the center of the image, in this case, is a perfect choice. And then finally, again, same thing. This could be symmetry, could be leading lines, could be just where I want to spend the next 6 months. I don't know. This is probably Bali or someplace like that. They have a lot of these things there. Yeah, that's really, in about 2 months, I'm going to look at this picture long and hard and, and really want to be there. So if I go back and find those, got to find my compositional. All All right, I think this is it. Nope, sorry, let me go back. I've got that slide hidden, that's why. There, that's what I was looking for. So what we looked at today were the use of diagonals, framing, perspective, simplicity, symmetry, and viewpoint. So remember, viewpoint and perspective, very, very close. The rest of them are all sort of, you know, are all different. But keep in mind that of these 11 compositional elements, if you use more than one in an image, you're probably going to have a winner. Keep your images simple. Try to eliminate distractions. Keep background elements from getting into the way. Again, the assignment's going to be the same as last week. I would suggest shooting these again in aperture priority. Use your exposure compensation dial to adjust if your images are coming out too light or too dark. Illustrate these final 6 compositional elements, and we'll see where we're at next week with it. Does anybody have any questions about any of the, well, it doesn't matter, anything, the new stuff we just looked at, or any of the other files we've looked at early in the class? Any burning questions on anybody's mind? Ashton, you had a cat on your head there for a second. So again, I'll post this information in the assignment area of Sakai next week. Also, I do believe that the link, the Zoom link for our meetings, because it's a recurring meeting, I think it's the same link every week. So if I don't post that for next week, you should still be able to get in with the link from this week. If you lose that or whatever, just text me and I'll make sure you get it. But I think we're going to be good just using that link for the rest of the time. All right, so if there aren't any questions, we've got, what, about a half an hour left in class time. You can either go use that to start on your assignment. Yeah, right. Or you can just go enjoy a little bit of the day. But that was, I know we spent a lot of time on composition. We're going to spend some time on lighting as well when we get to that, because those are the two most important things as far as being able to make your images stand out and sing a little bit. So last chance, any questions? All right, guys, let me stop sharing that. And we're going to call it a night. And we'll see you guys next week. And again, remember, the following week, there won't be a class or an assignment for that class probably, but there will be a video to watch. We'll see you all in a week.